All right, Kirk Sather, 91st Missile Wing Traffic Safety Manager here at Minot, North Dakota. We've got some important lessons to share with you. All right, so we're on the gravel road course. First and foremost, the first thing I always tell people is that the only acceptable place to travel on a gravel road is right down the middle. And the only caveat with that is that if you have to yield to somebody. And the reason for that is because a gravel road is stressed in the middle of the road. And as it gets maintained and gets pushed off, the gravel gets built up on the outside and it can create false road edges. So if I move over here to the right side of the road, I'm actually putting myself into a more hazardous position. And the hazard is that I could get pushed off of the road and pushed into the ditch. So again, we want to maintain a position in the center of the road and avoid the outer 2 feet of the road. Also, as we make this transition from gravel to pavement, we want to be mindful of our speed because we don't know how abrupt that motion will be as we transition. So as we get onto the pavement here and we travel again down here into the gravel, again, we want to be mindful of our speed and reduce our speed for that transition right there. Right in front of us is what's called a cattle guard. It keeps cattle on one side or the other. In this case, it's meant as an obstacle. And a lot of times these can be raised or lowered. And again, we want to be mindful of our speed going over these obstacles. As we make the turn around here, around this corner, we're coming up on what we've got simulated as a narrow bridge. And you'll notice as we approach this, I'll move on over to the right side, and you'll see that we're pretty much up against the right edge of the bridge here. On the left side, you can see that there's not enough room for another vehicle to move through. So the important thing here is to yield prior to entering the bridge to any oncoming traffic, or wait for them to yield to you. As we make this corner here, you'll see we're coming up on a hill, and as we get closer to this hill, you'll notice that if there was a car coming, we wouldn't be able to see that. So it's very, very important at this point that we find a position closer to the right edge of the road. In the event that a vehicle is coming up here, we're able to avoid a head-on collision. As we get to the top of the hill, notice there's nobody coming. We maintain that center road position again. Now about 50 yards ahead of us is an actual simulated railroad crossing. And this is just another opportunity to teach people to be mindful of their speeds, because the railroad tracks a lot of times can be elevated above the road position, and we want to slow down to a point that we're not going to lose control of the vehicle. And one of the last things we're going to do today is we're going to simulate going into a ditch. There may be a time where you have to go into the ditch to avoid a head-on collision. If you do that, the process for that is to be deliberate about it, enter the ditch at about a 45-degree angle as I am here. I'm going to stop here for just a second too to illustrate the fact that most of the weight of this vehicle right now is on the right front end of the vehicle. Right now, if I try to get this vehicle back onto the road by turning the wheel like this, I'm creating a trip point or a pivot point with that right front tire that could potentially lead to a rollover scenario into the ditch. So for departing the ditch, we want to accelerate a little bit. We want to start coming out, and then we want to exit the same way we went in, about a 45-degree angle. And we're out of the ditch, and we maintain our position in the center of the road. Right now we're in a Ford F-150. It is mounted on a skid car systems platform. It is hydraulically driven. It gives us the ability to reduce the friction on the front or the rear, or the front and the rear, which allows us to simulate a skid or slippery environment, allowing us to do a front or rear wheel skid. The first thing we're going to do and demonstrate is what does a front wheel skid look like, and of course then how would we recover from that. So as we're going around the corner, we identify front wheel skid by how the vehicle is reacting. A lot of times you'll feel it'll kind of plow through the corner, as we're turning, the wheel's turning, but we're not. That's a front wheel skid, okay? So I'll show you how to recover from that. So when we identify that, all we're looking to do is apply the brakes and put our steering wheel back forward. And the reason for putting our steering wheel forward again is because our tires are designed for grip in the forward position, not in a turned position. So again, the idea is to get the foot off the gas and apply the brake while getting that steering wheel turned back forward again. Let's move into how we recover, or how we identify rather, a rear wheel skid. A rear wheel skid is when your vehicle, the back end loses traction and it starts to slide in one direction or the other. One of the most important things to remember in a rear wheel skid situation is to not panic. We want to not panic, and we definitely do not want to brake. Okay, so once we identify the skid as a left or a right rear skid, what we want to do is we want to turn in the direction of the skid. So if my tires start to go, or my back end starts to go to the left, I want to turn my wheel to the left. And vice versa, if it goes to the right, I want to turn to the right. So here on this next corner up here, we'll go into a rear wheel skid. As we go into this corner, our back end starts to turn and we lose control. That's what happens when it's really, really slippery. You almost lose your ability to control the vehicle. And at that point, speed was a factor, okay? A lot of times, most of the time, speed is a factor when you lose control. Okay, so on this far corner over here, we'll try that one more time. We want to identify the skid quickly and then correct. So in this case, the right side will be coming out, and we want to steer to the right, just like that, to recover from that skid. Now in this next corner, we'll understeer a little bit and see what happens as we get into a skid. I didn't give it near enough correction to be able to correct for that skid. It was not proportional to the amount of skid. In that case, I should have had about another 45 to 50 degree turn on the wheel to be able to correct for that. Now on this next one, we'll overcorrect, and we'll see how that looks. See how when I put too much correction in there, it goes back the opposite direction. And if you don't correct that quickly, you're going to find yourself out of control. Another important demonstration is what happens when we brake in a rear wheel skid. So we go into this corner, and if I panic brake, that made a recoverable situation unrecoverable, because I removed my ability to control the wheels by locking up the brakes. So it's very important during a rear wheel skid situation that you do not apply the brakes. So that's kind of how to identify and correct for a rear wheel skid. Now what we're going to do is we're going to remove friction from the front and the rear. We're basically simulating a slippery surface. And what's important about this is that you need to identify the first skid that occurs. So if that ends up being a front wheel skid, you need to correct for the front wheel skid. If you don't do that, you could find yourself pushing into a rear wheel skid. So again, the idea with removing the traction on the front and the rear is that you correct for the first one that occurs. So we'll kind of demonstrate going into this corner here. So a little bit of a skid on the front. So what I want to do is I want to slow down and get my traction back. Skidding there, traction back, and continue.